あなたのしたことを人は罪と呼ぶのかもしれない。ですが、あなたが生きたいと願う本能を責められる人がいるでしょうか。誰にとっても死は等しく
ひどいことなのよ。若くても老いても善人も悪人も同じ。死は平等なの。特別にひどい死はない。
As I finish my rewatch of Shiki, I'm left speechless at the depravity the anime highlights in the struggle for life and death. When reduced to our biological instinct for self-preservation, humans and non-humans alike will resort to any means necessary in order to fulfill that basic function. I went into Shiki expecting a straightforward, even cliched narrative about villagers fighting vampiric monsters, or the Shiki. Instead, I got something far more complicated. A story where morality looms over everything, yet is unable to constitute what is right or wrong, only what can be understood through the nature of human and beasts alike. While examining the ethics of self-preservation, Shiki couples this idea with an even deeper question about life itself. What does it mean to be alive? Is life merely what exists before death? Or does it extend to the undead and their pseudo-existence? Shiki's exploration of death raises an unsettling question. If death is the permanent cessation of biological functions, then what are the Shiki? In the anime, those who return from death become Shiki, named after the very phenomenon they embody. Humans can become Shiki after being drained of blood or killed by another Shiki, but can they truly be considered alive? They look, think, and act as they once did. The only real differences are their lack of a heartbeat and their appetite for human blood. The anime forces us to confront a disturbing dilemma. Are Shiki a continuation of life, or just an extension of death? Imagine losing a loved one, grieving, holding their funeral, and then finding them standing before you once more, unchanged yet fundamentally different. It plays upon our deepest fears, the agony of loss, the search for closure, only to have it stolen by something that shouldn't even exist. But what is it that we truly desire? Do we wish for the dead to return, or for them to rest in peace? One moment in the anime captures this moral ambiguity. Amid the villagers' attempt to eradicate the Shiki, one mourns for their loved one, not because they died, but because they weren't turned. It's this gray area that complicates the perception of death. If death is so final, shouldn't the idea of revival bring solace, even if it means becoming Shiki? Yet, with each passing moment, the Shiki's hunger grows, gnawing away at their restraint, until survival becomes a desperate inevitability. Beyond the psychological horror of vampires and death, Shiki presents a more disturbing notion, the horror of existence itself. The Shiki are trapped in a limbo between life and death, unable to return to their former humanity, yet unwilling to accept their monstrous nature. How does one cope with such an existence? How do you reconcile the knowledge that you must kill to survive? Some Shiki try to resist, holding onto fragments of their past lives, clinging to their families and memories. But hunger always wins in the end. Others embrace their fate, transforming into something cruel and unrecognizable. For humans, the psychological burden is just as heavy. They are forced to see their loved ones not as people, but as threats. The moral question of killing Shiki becomes less about what is right and wrong, and more about what they can endure. Can you look into the face of someone you once loved and still see them as a monster? Or worse, see them as the person they once were and kill them anyway? The deeper horror lies in the gradual erosion of identity. The Shiki's memories persist, but their human attachments fray with time. Desperation breeds cruelty, and the longer they exist, the more detached they become from who they once were. Even the most well-intentioned struggled against the inevitability of their nature. This internal battle is what makes Shiki so effective as a horror. Not just fear of death, but fear of what survival turns us into. When Shiki explores the concept of self-preservation, we see it from two different perspectives, humans and the Shiki. Many newly risen Shiki still contain human emotions and a sense of belonging to their land and loved ones, and yet, as time passes, their hunger overtakes them. As Shiki, they can no longer eat human food. Instead, they must prey on humans for their blood. It's not that the Shiki themselves are evil, they simply have no other choice. They are trapped in a cruel cycle, blackmailed by older Shiki into preying on their own families, lest someone else does it for them. If the Shiki have the capacity to feel human emotion and still retain their memories, can we really say that they're any different from regular people? Like the Shiki, humanity also seeks to survive. We can debate whether or not the villagers' methods of ridding themselves of the Shiki are just, but I think it's irrelevant. From a human perspective, witnessing the decline of your home, seeing your numbers dwindle from an unseen threat, the only options are fight or flight. Shiki explores fear in a chillingly authentic way. As the show progresses, fear spreads like an infection. This fear manifests in a ritual. The villagers ravage and destroy their own village to root out any Shiki among them. For them, it's the only choice. It's like an invasive species entering the ecosystem, threatening the native population and their way of life. It is a reactionary measure, a desperate attempt to reclaim control. But Shiki complicates his idea by making us ask, is extermination justified if it means survival? The villagers begin an extermination, brutally hunting down every last Shiki they can find. They burn, they stake, they behead, and when that isn't enough, they turn on each other. Accusations of conspiracy with the Shiki also leads to human-on-human killings. The line between man and monster dissolves. Fear strips away rationality, leaving only desperation. The village, once united in its suffering, becomes divided by paranoia and bloodlust. Watching this unfold, I thought to myself, this is how horror really works. The monsters aren't just those with fangs, but those who let fear drive them to slaughter. Shiki reveals a terrifying truth. When backed into a corner, we justify anything for survival, even if it means becoming the very thing we sought to destroy. Young or old, good or evil, it's all the same. Death is impartial. By the end of Shiki, everything is in ruins. The village is burnt to the ground. The people are forced to evacuate. After all the bloodshed, after all the sacrifices, nothing was truly won. So, was it all worth it? Was survival just an illusion? Maybe that's why Shiki is so haunting. It doesn't make you fear death. It makes you question whether we ever understand the weight of our actions and if they ever even matter in the end. Shiki isn't a story about good versus evil. It's a story about survival and the lengths that are taken in order to live. The show explores the clash between two groups that, at their core, aren't so very different. The Shiki and the villagers act on the same instinct. They mourn, they love, they fear, only differing in their mode of survival. They kill, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. While the anime attempts to humanize the Shiki, its purpose isn't to sway us towards sympathy, but to highlight the undeniable similarities between them and the villagers. Shiki never asks us to choose a side, it only asks us to understand. To understand that in the face of self-preservation, humans and beasts alike will act accordingly. In the end, Shiki leaves us with no easy answers, only questions that linger long after the final scene. The show forces us to reflect on the nature of life and death, morality and necessity, and how fear can turn even the most righteous into monsters. Perhaps that is Shiki's ultimate lesson. Survival is never clean. There is no inherent justice in nature, no universal moral compass to guide our actions. When faced with the abyss, we act not out of righteousness, but out of instinct. Amidst all the horror and tragedy, there remains a small unsettling truth. No one was truly wrong. The Shiki only wanted to exist. The humans only wanted to protect their home. Even now, I wonder, if placed in the same situation, would I have chosen anything differently? Or would I, like them, simply do whatever it took in order to live? Death is impartial, and perhaps Shiki is telling us to accept that.